If I asked you how many different Pokemon live in the Kanto region, you'd probably answer with 150 or 151, right? I mean, that's the Kanto Pokedex, it's the original 151. But it's wrong, the Kanto Pokedex is incomplete. Or is it over-complete? Kanto and every other region all have Pokemon in their regional Pokedex that aren't actually found in the wild of that region. For example, in not a single Kanto game you've been able to catch Omanyte, Kabuto or Aerodactyl since they are extinct. They are no longer living in Kanto. Just like Eevee and Lapras, which are only obtainable by receiving them as a gift. These Pokemon cannot be found in the Kanto region otherwise. Games also frequently have post-game areas like the Battlezone Island of Sinnoh. On this island many Pokemon can be found that aren't actually in the Sinnoh regional Pokedex, while this island is still part of the Sinnoh region and these Pokemon should be included in the total species count. So as you can see, there is more to it than to just look at the regional Pokedex to answer the question of in what region live the most Pokemon? I did the research, I looked into it all and I have found the answer to this question and will now share it with you. But first, let me explain how I got to these exact numbers region by region. Let's begin where it all began in Kanto's Red, Blue and Yellow, where according to my calculations 134 Pokemon should be living in the wild. This is combining all three of these games. They of course have version exclusives, but a Pokemon only needs to be obtainable in one of these games in order to count. Now, you might be wondering how 134 is possible, but I like to think that if one Pokemon of an evolutionary line is available in a region, the entire line should technically be available in the wild. Both Pidgey and Pidgeotto can be found in the wild in Pokemon Red, but Pidgeot can't, yet I still included it. You can make the argument that I shouldn't, but I feel like this is more of a game limitation than an actual representation of the region. Beedrill and Butterfree can't be found in these games, but you're telling me none of these Kakuna and Metapod ever evolved? They just make these Pokemon uncatchable to make them feel more special to the player and not because these Pokemon don't live in the region. So if one Pokemon can be found, the whole line is included in the count, even if part of the line is from a different generation. The only exception to this is with regional evolutions. Obstagoon isn't included in the Hoenn count despite Zigzagoon being widely available there, but that's because Obstagoon only evolves from Galarian Zigzagoon, which cannot be found in Hoenn. Now back to Kanto, another thing worth mentioning here is that they have something called a Safari Zone. This is a nature preserve and in my opinion the Pokemon found here aren't actually wild Pokemon either. Yeah, you can catch them, but they live in an enclosed area. They can't leave. They might even been imported from other regions and put into the zone like some kind of zoo. There's plenty of tigers in America, but no one would claim tigers live in America. And I feel the same here. Yeah, there are Tauros alive in the Kanto region, but they're not in the wild. They can't go wherever they choose. Pokemon only found in the Safari Zone are not included in the count. And finally, we have legendaries which are wild and living in the region, but also are not included. Take Moltres for example. It's in the Kanto region, but it could leave at any time and then it wouldn't be in Kanto anymore. If there's only one of a Pokemon in a region, they also do not count in the count. So with that all said, there are 134 different Pokemon living in Kanto in Red, Blue and Yellow. But these aren't the only games including the Kanto region. There's also Fire Red and Leaf Green, and in these games, following the same rules, there are 183 different wild Pokemon. Though that is if you include the Savvy Islands into this, which have a lot of Johto Pokemon as well. Without them, the total number would only be 122, which is actually lower than Generation 1. And the Savvy Islands alone come to 136, which is only 2 higher than Red, Blue and Yellow. So, is that it for Kanto? Of course not, because in Gold, Silver, Crystal and the remakes we were able to visit Kanto again 3 years after the Kanto story takes place. And in these 3 years lots has changed. There's a lot of Gen 2 Pokemon living in Kanto now. Route 1 has Sandred and Hoodoo now, it's kind of insane. There's even Gen 2 Pokemon living in Kanto that can't be found in Johto itself, but that's a rant for another day. In Gold, Silver and Crystal, 162 Pokemon can be found in Kanto, which is 28 more than in Red, Blue and Yellow. So there's been a lot of migration going on in those 3 years, but hey, as long as these Pokemon are doing it legally and are integrating, there shouldn't be a problem with that, right? In fact, they're probably only making the culture better by introducing better food, and that's really all that matters, am I right, Piers Morgan? There's actually also a couple of Pokemon that can't be found in Kanto anymore after these 3 years. Namely Horsey, Seal, Ditto, Lickitung and Coughing. I guess there's not enough air pollution for them anymore.
It just doesn't smell bad enough.
Heart Gold and Soul Silver are actually even more insane, having 220 Pokémon that can be found in the wild. This is because these games have a new feature named the Hoenn and Sinnoh sounds, a certain frequency you could turn your radio to in order to make Gen 3 and 4 Pokémon appear on the grass. They can be found in the wild through other means, but I'd still say that they live in the Kanto region, right? It's not like the sound suddenly spawns them, they are probably just nearby in the area and get attracted to those sounds. But they have to be close enough in order to hear them, so yeah, still within the region. There's also mass outbreaks or swarms where for one day you can find a specific Pokémon on a specific route. But those I also did not include in the count. These Pokémon are just kinda migrating through the region and don't live there, they are visiting. Just because I visit the UK doesn't mean I live there, it doesn't count. And then there's one more Kanto game we of course have to take a look into, Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. Games which made my whole Safari Zone bit kind of irrelevant, because these games don't have a Safari Zone and just put every Pokémon in the wild anyway. To the point where now 176 Pokémon live in the wild in these games. Because keep in mind, evolutions from other games are included despite not being in the game. You can find wild Eevee, so every evolution counts. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee actually made every Gen 1 Pokémon count except for the fossils and Mew and Mewtwo. Even the starters and the birds can be found indefinitely, so they are included. If we now combine all games and look at their score, except for the Savvy Islands, because that's how I decided to do it and this is my video. Kanto, throughout all the games, has 267 different Pokémon living in the wild. A lot more than the regional Pokédex likes to make us believe, and a lot more than probably any of us expected. Johto, with the same rules as we've used for the Kanto region, which I won't explain again so we can go through it a bit faster now. Gold, Silver and Crystal had 195 Pokémon living in the wild, about 60 more than Red, Blue and Yellow had in Kanto. And the remakes had 248 Pokémon, once again a lot higher than I originally expected. Combining all games, it gives Johto a total of 251 wild Pokémon, 3 higher than Heart Gold and Soul Silver on their own. And that is because there is actually only one evolutionary line that is available in the wilds of Gold and Silver that is not in the wilds of their remakes. And that line being the Jigglypuff line, originally available on Route 46, not anymore. I wonder why they did that. Anyway, despite that, with Johto having 251 Pokémon, coincidentally the exact same number of Pokémon that existed in Generation 2, they do have a tiny bit less than Kanto with 267. Alpha Omega, make the trumpet sound, that's when Hoenn's out. Moving on to Hoenn, with the regional Pokédex of 202, has 184 Pokémon living in the wild, which is less than Johto did. I always hear people complain about Johto not having many team options, but maybe we should start taking a look into Hoenn. Though of course Hoenn's Safari Zone isn't included in the count, so maybe it's not a fair comparison. The remakes however actually almost double the count. 365 wild Pokémon. That's more than Kanto with all of its games combined. This is thanks to the Dex nerf, which in the postgame made Pokémon from future generations obtainable. And also through Mirage Pods, islands which would randomly become available a new one each day. Since they're not always available, I was considering not including them in the count, just like how I don't include Swarm or Mass Outbreak Pokémon. But I feel like this is different, because just because the island isn't available, doesn't mean the island isn't there or that the Pokémon aren't. They're still there even if you can't access them, unlike the Swarms which might not be in a region for an extended time. Combining all games, Hoenn has 377 wild Pokémon, a lot more than both Kanto and Johto, and 12 higher than Aurus alone, because the Pokémon that live in the wilds of Hoenn's Gen 3 that aren't available in Gen 6 are Mareep, Shuckle, Teddiursa, Houndour, Smeargle and Wobbuffet. Because despite Aurus having more Mirage Islands, it does not have the original one with all the Wynaut. Which makes you wonder, why not? Diamond, Pearl and Platinum. Now according to a lot of people, these are actually the greatest games of all time. And with a lot of people, I mean me. And they have a combined 304 Pokémon available in the wild. And of course that's not including the Great Marsh, because that's basically just another Safari Zone. The Platinum regional Pokédex only has 210 Pokémon, but the number is a lot higher thanks to the postgame island, where many Pokémon unavailable to the main island can be found. But there's also the Poké Radar, a post-game exclusive item that enables you to find other Pokémon as well. And there is another method of encountering Pokémon in this game called GPA insertion. If you played on the DS with a slot for a Game Boy cartridge and had one of the Gen 3 games in it while playing Diamond, Pearl or Platinum, you could find special Pokémon not available through other means. However, I decided not to include these into the count, because to me these didn't really feel natural. I feel like this is supposed to be some kind of out-of-universe glitch where Pokémon from the Game Boy glitch into the DS game, meaning they are not naturally found in the Sinnoh region. Another part that I didn't include in the count are the Pokémon exclusive to the post-game trophy garden. A little grassy area behind the Pokémon mansion where every day in the post-game a new Pokémon appears, usually not found elsewhere in Sinnoh. You're able to catch them just fine, however these Pokémon are actually placed here by one of the butlers of the mansion. He's importing them from other regions and so they are not naturally found here. They do not count. However, I did include Pikachu, who is also only available in the trophy garden, but already is so before the post game. Because Pikachu can be found any day, infinitely, is in the regional Pokédex, and it's only implied that the Pokémon are imported after you reach the post game. I do think Pikachu naturally lives here, just like the other Pokémon you find here before that. Meaning this is actually the first region Pikachu can be found in the wild in since Kanto. Now we also of course have the remakes BDSP, which has 274 wild Pokémon. Less than the original games, however this is only if you exclude the Grand Underground. Because in the Grand Underground alone, you can find 344 different wild Pokémon. That's more than all of Kanto above ground. Basically everyone is here. You have starters, Munchlax, Bidoof, everyone. Except for some reason, this is one of the only areas where you can find Magikarp. What's up with that? I do think we have to include the underground in the count because Under Sinnoh is still Sinnoh. But even with that, there's actually still Pokémon available in the wild of Diamond, Pearl and Platinum that aren't in the remakes. Namely the Marill line, also Pidgey and Nosepatch, which can only be found through swarms. While researching this, I actually found the concept of swarms kind of hilarious. A swarm of Pidgey I can understand, but you also have things like a swarm of Slackoth. I just kind of wonder what that would look like. Huh? Oh no! Watch out! A swarm of Slackoth is coming this way! We're doomed! Anyway, combining all Sinnoh games above ground and underground, Sinnoh has 407 wild Pokémon, which at this point is the highest out of any. Now, yes, Hisui and Sinnoh are the same region, but I will categorize them separate because there is such a huge time gap between them. I guess you could make the same argument for returning to Kanto from Johto, but that's only a 3-year difference, while this is like a lot more. I don't know where I'll draw the line exactly, but we're just gonna keep them separate, and Hisui has 203 wild Pokémon, the lowest one till now excluding the Savvy Islands. Though of course in the Hisui count we don't include swarms and space-time distortions, because these Pokémon are teleporting from another place or time and don't actually live here naturally. Now on to Unova with Black and White. The game is mostly known for the fact that the regional Pokédex didn't have any old Pokémon returning. But despite that, still many Pokémon from other regions can be found. You just gotta go to this area. There's plenty of them there. There's also this area called White Forest, and you can make different human characters appear in the forest, and depending on what people visit, different Pokémon will appear in the wild. These Pokémon I did not include because these Pokémon are only here because of the one specific human. If the person leaves, whether it be on holiday or whatever, the Pokémon would as well. It feels a bit too temporary to include them into the final count. But even leaving those out, in Black and White there are still 288 Pokémon living in the wild in Unova. 2 years later, however, with the events of Black and White 2, there are 344 wild Pokémon. A lot of different Pokémon migrated to Unova in that time, so I guess this takes place during the Biden's presidency. There's actually also a lot of Pokémon that are no longer living in the wilds of Unova after these 2 years. Namely Geodude, Ponyta, Cubone departing, Kangaskhan, Jinx, Hoodoo, Standler, Sableye, Mawile, Chimecho, Kricketot and Mischievous, which I think is a total shame because I loved Sting. And also Spearow, Ladybug, Ariados, Swallow and Slowpoke are now only available through swarms. Oh no! A swarm of Slowpoke is coming towards us! That's it! I'm moving again, up to Kalos. Now, Kalos is a region that to me always felt kinda small, but it also felt like there were a lot of team building options. The region even had 3 national Pokédexes because it didn't fit in just one, which I didn't really get, but I don't know, you do you, Game Freak. But then while filling in my spreadsheet and looking at the numbers, I found out in just X and Y there are 426 different wild Pokémon. That is more than all previous regions having all of their games combined. Does this explain them splitting up the Pokédex? Well, to me, not really, but that's still a lot. And of course, we recently had Pokémon Legends ZA come out, which also takes place in Kalos, so we gotta include it. I was thinking if the wild zones should be included or not, since they're kinda like enclosed areas, but I couldn't find any indication that these Pokémon are placed here by humans. It seems more like they're just naturally wandering into these areas themselves, and I do think they're wild. Though I'm not sure how they do it with the giant walls around the city and all.
Excuse me, sir. I'd like to take residence in Wild Zone 14. Do you know where it's located?
Oh yeah, it's in the west side. Just follow the river a second to your left.
Oh, thank you. I much appreciate it.
This is way better than Slack on the Slowpoke. Something from Legends ZA that I didn't include in the count are the Pokemon found in the Mega Dimensions of the DLC. Because even though you can access them from Kalos, it's an entirely different dimension and not actually Kalos itself. But from everything from the main game, Legends ZA still has 223 wild Pokémon living in the city, giving Kalos a grand 473 different wild Pokémon.
Aloha to the Alola. Wait.
Now, I'm not gonna lie, getting all this data was a lot of work. I had to go to Cerebi.net and go through all locations on the Poke Earth, and I put them all in the spreadsheet. I did it all myself, so I very well may have made a mistake here or there. The reason why I'm mentioning this here is because if I did miss something, I think the chances are the biggest that happened in the Alola region. I've actually only played Sun and Moon once, and that was when the games came out 10 years ago, dear god. And I've never played the Ultra games. So I'm not very familiar with the region, and I can very well have made a mistake somewhere. But I did try my best and I checked it a couple times, but I'm sorry if I did make a mistake. That being said, Sun and Moon had 333 wild Pokémon, the Ultra games 415, and combined 466 different wild Pokémon live in Alola.
What are you staring at, you wee pushcat? We gonna have a fucking Pokemon fight or what?
Sword and Shield, the generation mostly known for Dexit. From this point on, you were only able to transfer Pokemon into the games that were in the regional Pokédex, which consisted of 400 Pokemon. This was very unfortunate in my opinion, but at least the regional Pokédex wasn't small. Within this region of 400 Pokemon, there were 381 Pokemon living in the wild, because you know, starters, legendaries and fossils. However, Galar also has 2 DLCs, including new areas with different wild Pokemon. These are still part of Galar and should of course be included. The first DLC takes place on the Isle of Armor, where 212 wild Pokemon live, and the second one in the Crown Tundra, where 198 wild Pokemon live. Fun fact, did you know Welmer can be found in the wild and the Crown Tundra area, despite not being in the Crown Tundra Pokédex? I don't know why, but it's included in the count. The Crown Tundra also has the Max Lair, where you can enter Dynamax Adventures. A place where you can find almost any legendary in a limited amount of time, but I do not consider these Pokemon to be living in the wild of the Crown Tundra. According to my sources, legendary Pokemon don't necessarily live in the Max Lair permanently. Instead, the Dynamax energy attracts them from distant regions. And if you're wondering who my source for this actually is, well, of course, it's none other than the one and only famous ChatGPT. Paldea, another victim of Dexit, but Paldea actually has slightly more than mainland Galar with 393 wild Pokemon. The problem of Paldea, however, is that Scarlet and Violet is all there is to it. The DLC takes place elsewhere, and so these 393 is all there is to the region. It's still more than a lot of other regions with multiple games though.
Mochi! Mochi!
Final region, Kitakami, probably the smallest region, and that's also represented in their wildlife, with only 202 different wild Pokemon. Of course, the Scarlet and Violet DLC also had a second part with Blueberry Academy. A school that is actually part of Unova and not Paldea or Kitakami. So you could make an argument that this should be included in the Unova count, but it doesn't. Because despite there being many wild Pokemon living in this school, none of them are actually here naturally. Rhydon didn't naturally surf through miles of ocean to settle down in this school and start a family and have little Rhyhorn. These Pokemon are brought here, they're imported, and they don't count as actual wild Pokemon. And with that being said, we now have the final results for each region. The region with the least amount of wild Pokemon are the Sevi Islands with 136. Then the one with the second least amount is Kitakami with 202, only just falling below Hisui with 203. Then we have Johto and Kanto quite close to each other, before we have a big jump to 377 with Hoenn, followed by Unova, Paldea and Sinnoh. And finally, the 3 regions with the most different wild Pokemon are Alola, Kalos and Galar. That's it, more like... that's it. That's it, those are the results. However, we do have some more interesting stats we can take a look at.
The numbers don't lie, and they spell disaster for you.
We can also take a look at each individual Pokemon and see which can be found in the most amount of regions, among other interesting things. For example, did you know Riolu can be found in every region after Sinnoh, but not in Sinnoh itself? Maybe it shouldn't actually be called a Sinnohmon. Just like Larvesta, who can't be found in Unova, but can be found in Hoenn, Galar, Alola and Paldea. It's pretty rare in all these regions though, so I'm not sure what its origin actually is. Either way, we should start breeding this thing before they're all gone. Now let's take a look at the 3 Pokemon that can be found in the most amount of regions. With at number 3 we have of course none other than everyone's favorite Mount Moon encounter, Zubat, which can actually be found in every single region till generation 9, because it's not in Paldea or Kitakami at all. I actually made a video about this fact like a couple of years ago, and it's kind of funny to look back onto. Now in the second spot we have a Pokemon that can be found in the wild of every single region except for Hoenn. And I was actually very surprised to learn that this Pokemon was living in so many regions. I would not have expected this Pokemon to rank this high on the list, especially since it's not even a generation 1 Pokemon. Because the Pokemon I'm talking about is Heracross, and it actually can be found in the Emerald Safari Zone, so if you would include that, it's in every single region. But finally, there's another Pokemon that lives in every single region but one, that is ranked higher because it can be found in 20 different games, while Heracross is only in 13. And this Pokemon is none other than the legendary Magikarp. Of course, they're not in Unova, but besides that they can be found in every single game. Happy to see Magikarp ranked number 1 in something for once. Shout out to Carp, I'll be eating fish tonight. The most common Gen 9 Pokemon is the Dunsparce, which through Dunsparce's availability should be in 8 different regions. The most common Gen 8 Pokemon are Weirdeer and Ursaluna for the same reason. Gen 7 is Salandit in 4 regions. Gen 6 is Sylveon in 8 regions, and if you don't include it, it's Goomy in 6. Gen 5 is Petalil, and the least common, not including legendaries, fossils and starters, despite them not being at 0, is Blitzel with only 2 regions, and also Darumaka and Yamask if you count their regional variants separate. Gen 4 is Weavile in 10 regions, the same amount as Zubat by the way. Lowest is Togekiss and Glameow in only 3 regions. Can we get a regional evolution for Glameow already please? Gen 3 is Barboach in 9 regions. Lowest is Castform with only 2 and Gulpin with 3. Least common Gen 2 Pokemon is Togepi. And finally, the least common Gen 1 Pokemon is someone that makes total sense to be this low. Only found in the wild of Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee and Ores. It's Porygon, a man-made Pokemon. And if you don't wanna include Porygon, next are Farfetch'd and the Hitmonbros only in 4 regions. And that is all I've got for you. That's it for me. Thank you for watching. Have a great 2026 or whenever you're watching this. Stay safe, be good. Check out one of my other videos if you want. And also, good night.